And we are live. Welcome to Olivia's stories, ladies and gentlemen.
I hid my marriage from my affair. I'm even saying it wrong because shouldn't I be hiding my affair from my marriage? Yeah, I guess that's what you all are thinking. But trust me, I hid my marriage from my affair. I had an affair as I was married, and my affair found out and confronted my husband, which in turn ruined my marriage. How sick must I have been to have an affair while being married? Well, I can assure you I was perfectly fine. I never wanted to marry in the first place. I had been forced into the marriage. Meanwhile, I had still been madly in love with the man I was having an affair with, and not the one I was supposed to be married to. Even when I had married my husband, there had been no transfer of feelings. I never loved my husband. I don't think I would have ever loved him. I would have simply stuck to living in a loveless marriage as long as I was peacefully having my affair. But my affair found out I was married by a slip, and now I didn't have any of the both men in my life. This was all because of a stupid mistake. Before you all come on here to judge me, I was in love. My affair was the one I had planned on getting married to, but then my parents decided to have an upper hand on who I spend the rest of my life with, so they got me married to my husband as at then. I didn't love the man, I had someone that I loved, and I didn't want to let it slip out of my hands. So I continued to see the love of my life while I had married my husband at my parents' request. And the relationship with the love of my life became an affair. My life was absolutely perfect. Nobody knew of my shenanigans, and I was extremely careful, but then I was found out even with all my carefulness. I had been married to my husband for 2 years before everything began crumbling down. Like I had said earlier, I had gotten married to my husband because of my parents and how they had forced me to get married to him. He was a means to an end for my family. I mean, if they had left me, I would have stayed unmarried until my affair decided to propose to me. But according to my mother, I was getting too old to be a spinster and talk was being raised in the church. Yes, my parents were overly religious and high-standing members of the Christian church. They ruined my life because they didn't want tongues wagging in the church. Well, I had been the one to ruin my life, but they had started the chain of events. Time for a little backstory to get you to understand. My name is Sarah, and I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Nick, and he's 30 years old. My husband had been the eligible bachelor at my church, and my parents had through him quite the snatch. He was rich, good-looking, religious, and was a doctor. All the things that ticked a parent's good book. Ugh! I had hated my husband at first because he was about to come in between me and the man I only had eyes for. I had no plans of even getting married to him, honestly. I was going to stand my ground and tell my parents that I already had someone I already had in mind to marry. In fact, that had been what I had done. Then I had reality handed back to me with my mother's shouts of retaliation if I refused to get married to who they wanted me to marry. I know some of y'all will be shocked at the prospect of arranged marriage still being a thing. Well, it was when it was my turn to get married, even upon my cries, that I had someone I wanted to marry, someone I loved. That just seemed to provoke my dad all the more, and if there was one thing my dad was, it was strict and thorough. Okay, that's 2 things, but you get my gist. He went and dug out everything on the man I wanted, and it turned out there was something suspicious on the man I wanted. So with much persuasion, I got married to my husband, the one my parents wanted and had been in support of, the doctor and the rich guy. On the day of my wedding, I didn't tell the guy I was in love with that I was getting married. He wasn't a religious person, and my wedding was a formal religious ceremony with a small reception at my home later, but that was it. So there was no way he could have known, and that's how I had married my husband. Yeah, everything was peaceful after my marriage. I didn't forget about my lover. We just went out of communication until one fateful run-in. I was doing a late evening shopping and we bumped into each other at the grocery store and I fell for temptation. That's how I began having an affair with my former lover while being married to my husband of 2 years. I'm not putting this piece out here to be judged. I had a chance to be with the person I loved and please the people that brought me into this world, and I took it. It was perfect. He didn't know I was married, of course, which made it all the more perfect. He would have never taken me back if he knew I had been married from the start. But he didn't know. I went to see him on the days my husband had back-to-back calls in the hospital, which was almost every day, so there was no way I could have been caught by my husband. In all fairness, I didn't think my husband truly loved me. He cared for me and provided for me, but he hadn't loved me, now that I think of it. He had been in love with that darn hospital, so forgive me for going somewhere else to seek love and comfort. I mean, there was a time when my husband didn't ask if I was okay or even alive when he had stayed at the hospital for a full week on call. Sure, I had already started my affair with my lover, but that strengthened my resolve to stay in the affair even more. It was like I was just a property he had acquired and he couldn't be bothered to check up on me or anything. I had complained to my parents, my mom especially, but she had seen me as whiny. According to her, my husband was doing real work to be able to provide for the family we would have. Yeah, well, while he was doing his work, I was being worked on. I don't apologize for it. But hiding everything came at a great cost. Like I had mentioned earlier, my life had been perfect. An unaware husband and a hot lover, both which didn't know of each other, and I was making it work. Yeah, my fantasy didn't last very long before I was caught by my lover. He had paid close attention to certain signs which led to me being caught and humiliated like a thief. I hadn't committed any crime. Stringing two men along hasn't and will never be a crime. But I was treated like I had committed a crime. I was just after my own happiness, since I never got it in the first place. I didn't have it after everything. While going to see my lover, I had always been careful. I made sure to get rid of every sign of marital life that could give me away. I always left my ring at home, hid my husband's texts, and even went so far as creating another homepage on my phone that didn't show pictures of my married life. Luckily, I had few friends, so there was no one to be a tattletale to my lover or my husband. My marriage life had been a secret airtight vault from my lover, and my affair had been a secret airtight vault from my husband and family. There was no slipping from me, so I had thought. Things began warping up together when my husband got an extended leave from the hospital and started spending time at home. It was like his senses switched and he realized he had a wife at home and began behaving like a cat in the heat of mating season. It was irking, because he had no right to abandon me and start behaving like I was the only source of water left in the world. Can you imagine how confused and irritated that left me? I was finally getting back my happiness after being forced to marry him and taking the back seat between him and his relationship with the hospital, and it was then he decided to act like I exist. I hadn't liked it one bit. Anyway, he began acting all loving and affectionate, wanting to take me on trips, shopping. Basically, he wanted to accompany me anywhere I went. That put a dent on my relationship with my lover, as I couldn't get to see him more often. The first week I'd had to lie that I was on a trip, but the coming weeks with my husband still on leave, my lover began to get more demanding. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he would call me on FaceTime to know where I was and what I was up to, with my husband right there in the room with me. Everything started to become suffocating as I couldn't focus properly and juggle the two. It ultimately became hard and I slipped. Yep, I slipped, and that's how I was caught by my affair. The calls from my lover became too much, so I decided to risk it and go see him. Most wrong decision of my life. I forgot to change my phone settings to the created homepage that hid my husband's text and his pictures from the prying eye, and that night while I was in bed with my lover, I got a text from my husband asking if I got to my mom's place safely. It was total mayhem from that point onward. My phone pinged, and my lover picked it from the dresser and saw my husband's profile photo, which was a picture of us from our wedding, and he went livid after he read the text. He smashed my phone on the wall and called me all sorts of names before demanding I leave his house. This had been in the early hours of the morning, so imagine me with clothes from the previous day and my coat wrapped around my body, standing on an empty street, hoping and praying for a taxi, even though I wasn't religious and couldn't go to my parents' place as they were out on a trip. All because I chose to have an affair with someone who I had loved dearly before my parents ruined my relationship with him. Then he found out I was married and decided to invoke mayhem for lying to him and leading him on. If you had been in my shoes, what would you have done? Well, at that point, I was at a total loss for words. I ended up getting an Uber back to my house and waiting till about 6 in the morning before sneaking into the house. The sneaking didn't do much good because I was caught by my husband and had to explain why I had left my parents' house early. I had pulled a good lie, but I had known nothing was going to save me from what was coming. This was the point where I probably should have confessed, but I hadn't. Everything seemed quiet after the night my lover threw me out of his house once he found out I was married. It was too quiet, but I wasn't complaining. My life went back to normal. Well, it went back to the way it was before the start of my whole affair. Because I don't think my life had ever been normal since I married my husband. My husband resumed work, and I was back to being the forgotten and neglected property wife. Would you call me stupid if I said I missed my affair? Yeah, I was stupid because instead of letting the sleeping dog lie, I sought it out. Yes, I went back to my lover and lied about everything. Once again, I was stupid, but I was desperate for that slight feeling of happiness. When I say I had lied about everything, I lied about the picture, and how my husband was my best friend, and the picture was from a photo shoot we did together for one of my mom's friend's wedding boutique to announce her new collection. He believed it, or so I thought once again. I didn't know he agreed so he could gather evidence of me cheating. I was stupid, a total mass of stupidity, that's what I was. I had dug myself an even bigger grave in the mistake I had made. I started sneaking off to see my lover, not knowing every time I was with him, I was helping him gather evidence of my unfaithfulness. I found out the hard way on another fateful evening when I was preparing to go home after spending the entire day at his place. He had a pile of pictures of us together placed on his table like he wanted me to see it, and when I had asked him what he was planning to do with the pictures, that's when I got to know I was sharing my bed with a monster. In explicit terms, he told me to publicly divorce my husband, or he was going to make everything public and not in a gentle way. To say I got scared was the least understating term I could think of, so I ran from him. I ran with the pictures, of course. I didn't know what I had planned to achieve at that point in time, but I was hoping those were the only copies he had of our affair together, and if I was with them, he didn't have anything to blackmail me. Feel free to call me stupid with any word you can think of. How did I think running away with the evidence would make the fact that I had an affair go away? It didn't in any way. As before, the first week was quiet. No sign of my threatening lover anywhere. The second week was when chaos struck. And it struck in church. Yes, with my mom and my dad present, my ex-lover walked up to the podium to testify about me and his life. You would think this stuff was one for the books, but I witnessed it live. He didn't outrightly say my name, but I knew he was threatening me. It was as plain as day. He threatened to expose my cheating self in front of everyone in the church. My parents would have had a fit if he had succeeded, but I took my lesson and counted my blessings. I'm sure this is where you guys would probably be expecting me to say I ran straight to my husband and confessed my stupid deeds. I didn't. More like I couldn't. My husband chose that week to sleep over at the hospital. I couldn't walk into his workplace and be like, "Oh, I had an affair outside our marriage." That would have been a big mistake. But it turned out, waiting was an even bigger mistake, because by the time my husband came back from his week-long shift, pictures of my cheating had been plastered all over our house. My affair decided to pay my husband a visit with evidence, but when he didn't find my husband at home, he decided to put up the pictures all over our front porch. He hadn't been joking when he had said he would make me regret it, and it was at that moment that it dawned on me that I had ruined my marriage. The way my husband looked at me like I had killed his whole hopes and dreams still has me traumatized. After he came home and found the pictures, he threw me out of the house and cut off all contact with me. My parents had been asking me what went wrong, and since he hadn't told them, I decided not to either. Do you guys think I should have told him when I had the chance? Do you guys think my husband would have listened to me at that point if I had confessed to him? Update 2. Hi Redditors, I'm back with an update after cheating on my husband with my longtime lover. After being thrown out of my husband's house, I went to my parents' place to stay and lied to them that my husband was working week-long shift at the hospital, so I thought I would stay with them instead of staying in an empty house. They bought my lie and in turn bought me time before the whole reality of divorce and everything settled in. It didn't last long though. I was thrown into reality within a month by the presence of divorce papers in my mail. Of course, by the time the divorce papers came along, my parents had already gotten the feeling that something was up. My dad was anything but a stupid man, unlike his daughter. Anyway, the day the divorce papers showed, my parents sniffed it out and I got the parental scolding. Imagine scolding a fully grown adult. LOL. They didn't give 2 cents to the fact that I was grown, and I probably didn't want the marriage in the first place, that's why it didn't work out. To my parents, it was how their image would look in the church when word of my divorce comes out. So they threw the papers in the trash and called my husband. I started going to therapy with my husband. Yes, as a result of my parents' cajoling, my husband decided he could be in my presence again. No one gave a thought to what I wanted. However, I agreed to the couple's therapy so I could talk to my husband, or not ex-husband, because I was still going to sign the divorce papers from the look of his face. I wanted to sign them. Sure, I had said previously that I had ruined my marriage. I didn't want it to end that way, with my husband seeing me as a cheat, even though I was. I wanted the end of our marriage to be peaceful. That's why I had agreed to the therapy. It helped a lot. We talked about how the marriage was rushed on us, and we truly didn't have any time to develop our feelings. We talked a whole lot, and there had been no shouting through the sessions. It was as peaceful and helpful as ever. I began seeing my husband in a new light. I signed the divorce papers a month after therapy, finally having the courage to face my parents and tell them the marriage wasn't going to work out, at least at the time. Safe enough to say, my husband and I became friends and just hung out whenever we could. It was all wholesome, and I thought my life was finally going to have semblance of peace, but I was wrong. In fact, I'm always wrong when it came down to these kind of things. You know, things like thinking my life was back on track or all was right in my world. My ex-lover, the affair that has ended my marriage, decided he wasn't done with me yet. He showed up to my house. Yep, knocked right at the front door with my parents around and introduced himself as my lover. Up till that moment, I had never truly told my parents what had happened to make me and my ex-husband split up. They had thought we just agreed to go our separate ways because of indifferences. They didn't know it was because I'd had an extramarital affair. They found out that evening, and my dad brought out his shotgun for the first time since I could remember, ready to blast off my ex-lover's head. Luckily, my mom convinced him to put it away. And do you want to know what popped out of my ex-lover's mouth next? A marriage proposal. Like the hooligan actually thought he would pop by my parents' house with a marriage proposal and I would be so inclined to say yes, that my parents would be so inclined to bless the marriage. Can you comprehend the audacity of the man? How had I been in love with him before and ruined a perfect marriage? It was then I realized I had been foolish to get with him all because of a little sliver of happiness. I had been totally foolish. He continued yapping that he had done away with all the pictures, and he hadn't known what came over him to do that, but he was truly sorry, and that he loved me enough to want to marry me. According to him, he just got so jealous and livid that I had gotten married, and I had hidden it from him. That was what had made him react the way he did. He said he had dreamt of marrying me since we had been together before my marriage, and seeing me already married but not to him threw him off guard. All of that just sounded like a well-thought-up script to my ears. After he was done talking to himself, because it definitely wasn't me he was talking to, he was shoved out the door with a shotgun to his back, and my father promised him a bullet in his skull if he was ever seen around me. I never saw him again, luckily, and my life went back to normal, at least for me. However, knowing as how people were people, talks and speculations about my marriage started coming up, and the gossip was enough to drive me mad. So I left. Yes, I left my parents' church, left Hood River, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, because I was after my happiness and maybe one day a true unconditional love. Hello Reddit users, I hope you guys learned a thing or two from my negative experience. Never let anyone dictate your life for you, especially as an adult, from your friend to your parents. I couldn't say no to my parents, and I ended up ruining what was someone's idea of perfect. Also, never fall for an illusion of happiness. We all deserve to be happy, but we deserve to be happy the right way. My experience taught me a lot, and honestly, I'm doing better now. I really hope you guys learn from me too, and not see me completely as the villain. Sure, I was a bad person to my husband, but I had thought I was doing it for me, and I learned the hard way. Lastly, do not fall for an illusion of love. If it's right, we all will know. I'm still trying to find that right feeling in my life. If I find it, I'll definitely give you all an update as to what true love is like. Until then, stay happy, fellas.